Okay, everyone, this is Adam Hoffs from the National Operations Center of Excellence. We're going to go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, part 3 of our cybersecurity series, which is focusing on national cooperative efforts for cybersecurity and transportation. This cybersecurity webinar series kicked off in February, where we had a webinar to understand the what, why, and how of cybersecurity for IT and OT. And then part 2 focused on cybersecurity tools and processes for information technology and operational technology. Both these webinars are available using the links to the bottom right of your screen. We have recordings of those down below. If you don't know already, the National Operations Center of Excellence is designed to offer resources to support the TISMO community. Feel free to browse the entire collection of no-code resources in our Knowledge Center, subscribe to our website and our newsletter for major TISMO announcements. The links in that bottom right-hand box should point you in that direction and are useful. So for this and every webinar, a recorded version along with the presentation slides will be available within 24 to 48 hours in the on-demand learning section of our website. So that'll probably be Monday morning when you want to share with your colleagues. We'll have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions, we encourage you to enter them in the question pane at any time. You will see them right there under my chat question there. We are looking for feedback and some questions, especially from our presenters from the Southwest Research Institute. So be sure to join in that question area throughout the presentations. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ray Resendez of the Volpe Center to kick it off. And as Ray is uploading his slides, I'll let you know that we're going to start off with Ray, like I said, Ray Resendez of USDOT's Volpe Center. Then we're going to move to Daniel and Marissa from the Southwest Research Institute, who are going to talk about their NCHRP projects 03-127 on cybersecurity of traffic management systems. And then last but not least is going to be Siva Narla of ITE, who's going to talk about some of the efforts going on at ITE. So Ray, if you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, Ken, is that working?
Almost up for me.
Okay, let me know when it's you can see it, and I'll get started.
Still loading, looks like. Looks like it's about to come up here. There we go. We can see it.
Great. Good afternoon. I'm Ray Resendez with the Volpe Center, and I'm going to talk to you today about a project that we are doing for the ITS Joint Program Office and NIST on applying their cybersecurity framework to the connected vehicle environment. There we go. So with the expansion of connected vehicle environments being deployed, not only the US DOT sponsored pilots, but as well as other localities deploying connected vehicle infrastructure, it's become more important to provide guidance and tools that are specific to this environment so that they can understand how to manage their cyber risk as well as to protect privacy with regard to PII. We'll see most organizations are cognizant of protecting PII, but you can see that you can start pulling information together if you don't spend, or rather a threat can pull information together from multiple sources if you don't do a good job on that. Now, the three speakers today, including myself, are discussing three related projects that from a distance can sound alike. So I wanted to spend a moment explaining how they are related. So we basically are looking at three different levels of systems in the transportation sector, from the ITE project, which is looking across all of ITS, and then my project is looking at the connected vehicle environment within ITS, and then the NCHRP project is really looking at field devices, which is a subset that overlaps there. Now, all three projects are looking at various stages of implementing the NIST framework process. They're all seeking to develop tailored guidance to help the transportation community. And then NCHRP and ITE are also looking at having an ongoing response and recovery capability for the community. Now, if we back it up to why we took this, this tactic, the NIST was charged in Executive Order 13636 to develop a cybersecurity framework that addressed the critical infrastructure in the United States, the critical sectors, and they came up with, I think it was about 18 different ones. Transportation is one of those. They were looking at a cost-effective approach. They were not trying to reinvent the wheel, and it is not regulatory. It's a voluntary approach. So they're using existing standards, and they took a business-driven approach. So not as much from developing new technologies, but how can an organization, whether it's a public or private organization, understand what its risks are, what its priorities are, and then how can it protect itself. And then finally was trying to build a culture of protecting cybersecurity throughout an organization, throughout an industry, throughout the entire sector. So I'll explain that in a moment. Now, what NIST came up with was the cybersecurity framework, which has these three components: the core, the profile, and the tiers. The core looks at the mission of an organization, not the cyber mission, but what does that organization do? What do you do for a business, or if you're a public entity, what are you in charge of taking care of? And then it breaks that down into functions. What does it take for you to deliver that mission? Then the profile allows you to break those down and relate them to your priorities. What are the most important services or functions that your organization delivers? And how does cybersecurity affect that? And then finally, the implementation tiers on the bottom are the very detailed layer where you look at your priorities, you look at standards that exist or technologies, and how do you protect them? And then it allows you to set priorities with the assumption that an organization doesn't have endless resources to address cybersecurity. Now, to go through each of these, the first one is the core, which defines the functions of the organization and then breaks them down into, from a cyber approach, into these 5 areas. So we have identify risks to your system, your assets, and your data. Then how do you protect those? How do you detect if something's gone wrong, if there's been an intrusion, or you've just had some other type of failure? How do you respond in the case that something's gone wrong? And then how do you recover from that. And as you think about your organization and what we've seen as we've looked at connected vehicle environments, most organizations spend their time worrying about how do they protect their systems without spending too much time on how do you detect, respond, and recover. So really the resilience of something going wrong doesn't get looked at. Now the profile aligns the core with the business requirements. So this is where you look at your mission and your mission functions, and it allows you to identify what is your current state for cybersecurity in each of those functional areas, and what is the future state that you desire. It allows you to identify your gaps and then build a roadmap to achieve that. And you may not detection, each of the functions, how much you value those for your mission objectives may vary based on your organization and what's more important to you. If you don't happen to have a lot of proprietary or PII data, if your data gets, if someone gets access to your data, that might not be a big problem, but if you do have PII or other things, that might be a bigger deal. So you would spend more money on protection versus response. And then finally, the tiers. And this allows the organization to look at your risk and processes and figure out how do you want to manage that risk. So the if you start at the bottom on the lower part of the slide where you see the tier 1, you look at how do you respond for each of these functions. Partial is informal, ad hoc, basically you're reacting to a problem. Tier 2 is informed, so your practices you have approved practices in place, but they're not completely established throughout the organization. And then 3 is repeatable, so you have the approved processes and they're established throughout the organization, meaning they're being up and down the organization, they're recognized and obeyed. And then adaptive is where your practices are fully established and then you have continuous improvement going on. So as you can imagine, tier 1 would be the least resource intensive and tier 4 would be the most. So for each of your functional areas, you would have to you'd have to look at your requirements and decide where you want and need to be for each of those. Now, in practice, we're looking at connected vehicle environments. Although there's a lot of deployment going on right now, the most mature environment in the United States right now is the Ann Arbor Connected Vehicle Test Environment, which evolved out of the safety pilot up in Michigan. So it's the largest existing deployment right now. It covers 27 square miles and they're trying to add 15,000 vehicles a year. We used this as our initial test case because it was the most mature. It had infrastructure and vehicles in place, and it had the experience from the safety pilot. So this allowed us to meet with the Ann Arbor team. So this wasn't just the University of Michigan. We included all the stakeholders from the City of Ann Arbor, the Michigan Department of Transportation, and some of their private participants as well to walk through the the cybersecurity framework with the staff from NIST. So we started this back in November with a 2-day workshop where we identified the mission of the environment, broke that down into the functions and sub-functions. And from that, we step one, we got the mission statement of using communication between vehicles and the infrastructure to enable applications that improve safety, mobility, and sustainability, which is going to be, I imagine, pretty close to any connected vehicle environment. Then you see where we broke down to the mission objectives. So they had 16 categories 16 objectives that we broke into 4 categories. What's unique about Ann Arbor, as opposed to, say, the connected vehicle pilots that are being deployed right now, and some of the other ones, they started out as more of a research environment. So if you read through their objectives, they are more focused on how do you define your connected vehicle environment, and then how do you get it built and deployed, and then finally operations and maintenance. And then their operations and maintenance has a bit more of a research focus than an operationally deployed system would have. So each of these functions then get mapped to the core functions, the 5 I mentioned earlier: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. In addition, we also are developing a privacy risk assessment tool to help connected vehicle environments manage privacy. So this is a process to assess the risk for PII in a system or organization. And this actually gets down to a fairly detailed level of understanding the data flows within a system and an organization. So where is PII? What systems does it go through? Where does it get stored? Not only electronically, but also hard copies of information. Where does that get kept? What are the processes for creating it, using it, and destroying it after it's no longer needed? So by the end of this project, we will have this as an additional function that we hope to incorporate into the NIST cybersecurity framework, because right now this is not included in the CSF. So then to wrap up where we're going, so the NIST team used the information from the workshop. They're currently developing the implementation tiers and then helping to develop the guidance on handling the PII. We have just wrapped up coordinating with the CV pilot sites to understand how they are, what attributes they share and are also different from the Michigan site, so we can build that into the guidance that will result from the end of this project, which would be specific for connected vehicles. If you need any more information, you can contact me here, or I believe we'll be taking questions after the 3 presentations are completed. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Again, for those who may have joined us a little bit later, we are taking questions at the end, so as you think of them, please be sure to put them in the question box there on the right-hand side of the screen. That would be great. Coming up next is the team from Southwest Research Institute, Daniel Zajac and Marissa Ramon. They'll be presenting on their NCHRP projects. Again, they're going to seek some input and questions as well, so be sure to put those in there on the question box on the right. We'll address them at the end. Turn it over to Daniel and Marissa.
Hello, my name is Dan Zajac. I'm a senior research engineer at Southwest Research Institute. I'm currently the PI on the Cybersecurity of Traffic Management Systems, NCHRP 03127. And I also have Marissa Ramon.
Hello. Yes, I'm the project manager on the NCHRP 03127.
So I was just going to give a quick overview of the project as we've been kind of going through it. So the few things I'm going to go through today is just an overview of the program goals, the stakeholders, who we are as a research team. We're currently partnered with another group, the current process, the tasks that are ongoing, and a quick overview of the schedule. But basically this program, like Ray was saying before, the intention is to help improve cybersecurity posture of the traffic management systems. So there's a variety of ways that can be accomplished, but the effort we're working under is going to count and look across domains to see if there's ways that we can leverage cybersecurity research that has occurred in other domains and apply that to the traffic management systems themselves. There's also looking to see if we can use pieces of TMS equipment and subject them to embedded testing to see if we can find and identify vulnerabilities, and how we build up the process of identifying, tracking, monitoring, and allowing third parties to submit recognized vulnerabilities within that equipment, and then make that actionable within a TMS so they know how to approach a cybersecurity problem, address it, and move forward. A big part of our task is going to be going through a red team assessment of the high priority equipment. So after we do the assessment and try to identify things that we determine to be, well, us in our panel determine to be the kind of high priority equipment, we're going to obtain that and then submit it to Praetorian, who's our third party I'll introduce in a minute here. And they're going to do an independent threat assessment of that equipment. So they'll take it apart, they'll go through it, they'll examine the equipment, they'll look for flaws and vulnerabilities, you know, default credentials and things like that. And we'll use that as feedback into our process. Really the end goal of this effort is going to be developing a guidance that you can use at your state and local agencies for trying to help identify things like, it's kind of like a web tool that you could walk through, plug in different features of your system, and kind of give you a step-by-step idea of how to go forward trying to improve your security of your system. So each TMS, talking to the different groups that we've been talking to, has kind of differing levels of what they determine their security level to be. Some groups are very proactive. They've been trying to implement cybersecurity for a while. Some groups are just getting started. Some are trying to find funding. Some have lots of funding for it. Some have none. So the idea here is that we're going to try and make a kind of common man way for assessing cybersecurity risk to a TMS. So hopefully that the poor guy that comes in from IT that's been assigned that day to be the cybersecurity point of contact for the TMS can kind of get started and figure out what he needs to do and how he can move forward, generate reports, and kind of go approach his management about what to do next to try and improve their situation. But the web-based guidance will basically try to identify risks to current and field networks, and we'll recommend changes that maybe be able to implement and reduce those risks, so things like password management systems and other types of common cybersecurity kind of sanitation issues. And we'll look at the implications of adding CV and AV technologies to the field networks. So as these new technologies are being run through their paces in some of these demo situations, what is that going to mean when this stuff starts to kind of go full scale and TMSs start buying equipment, adding it to their networks, and then trying to handle the information that's exchanged between nodes and coming back to the TMS and then look at best practices for deployment of CV and AV technology. So try to cultivate some of the things we've learned from those test sites, and as well as other areas across domains that we can pull in and say, these are really good things that you can follow. The best thing about best practices is they really kind of are boots on the ground application for the most part. So cybersecurity is a very nebulous sort of challenge that people always approach. You know, giving people something they can look and read and it says, hey, we did this and it works good for us, and go act on those things is really usually helpful for people that are just kind of getting into the cybersecurity realm and trying to protect their systems. And then kind of a broad brush goal is to help promote this across industry. So as we go through it, we're kind of reaching out. We're trying to identify different groups within Canada, United States, Europe, whoever that's interested in talking about cybersecurity for TMSs, whether they have past experiences, whether they've experienced issues, or they're kind of leading the industry as far as trying to embrace cybersecurity with a TMS. We're definitely interested in talking to you, and please reach out to us, and we'd love to have a conversation with you. So who are our stakeholders? Primarily, the people we're trying to work towards is state, county, and transportation agencies, metropolitan planning organizations, the Federal Highway Associations, highway service patrol contractors, state and local law enforcement, fire transport, and transportation system cybersecurity framework. Really anyone that touches a TMS is going to be impacted to some degree. And so who are we? Like I said, I'm from Southwest Research, myself and Marissa, and we also have Matt Bevel, who I'm not sure if he's on the line or not. He's from Praetorian Cybersecurity. We are a joint research effort team. We're based out of San Antonio, Texas. We've been doing R&D for about 70 years. We've been doing ATMS for 25 to 30 years, and then we have about 40 ATMS deployments across the country. We have a huge pile of stuff in our labs, everything from messaging science to sensors to managed lane systems to simulators, everything. We do development on-site here in San Antonio, and we support Texas and a variety of other different states across the United States. Praetorian has specific concentration in cybersecurity. They're out of Austin, Texas, which makes them regionally close to us, and they are experts in embedded systems, cloud, and crypto analysis, and a few others. They have excellent cybersecurity backgrounds. Their credentials go all the way up to Department of Defense and others. A really sharp group of people up there. So I think we really make an excellent team between Southwest Research really understanding traffic management systems and cybersecurity, and then Praetorian acting as our independent third-party, red team assessment group. So the program process, we've kind of simplified it into this diagram, but primarily the first chunk is going to be research. We've already completed a literature search. It's out available on our project website. You can download it, first draft. But basically we're going to go collect a whole bunch of information from across different domains. We're reaching out to folks, trying to get conversations. Cybersecurity, always kind of a touchy subject, and trying to get people to open up about it, sometimes challenging. We have a strict non-disclosure policy with anyone we talk to that will sanitize information and make sure that we get clearance from the people that supply it before we share it with anybody. But and then we're also looking to VTX and TMS equipment. Southwest Research also has a substantial VTX component. We've been helping develop the standards for connected vehicles and things for years. We've been hosted Plugfest and everything else, so we have experts in that field as well. And finally, identify the cybersecurity goals. So this is kind of looking across, trying to say what's reasonable for TMS to obtain as a wide distributed network of embedded systems. And then we're going to move into the risk and adversarial system analysis. Basically, this will be going out and trying to identify the high-risk equipment. So we've been cultivating a list of all the different equipment we can find from either publicly published lists of equipment, input from the review panel, contacts we've made in industry, our equipment lists, and we're kind of trying to build this huge inventory with it. And from that, we're going to go and see if we can find any published attacks on that equipment. Fortunately, there hasn't been a lot of stuff published, or unfortunately, however you look at it. But the few things we can identify, we have a history of doing penetration testing on equipment in our labs, so we're familiar with a lot of the common things that we run into. And then Praetorian is very good at identifying a very methodical process for assessing hardware penetration efforts on equipment. So basically, this first effort will be a broad brush attack on what's all the equipment out there, what's the initial state of the art, what's the hacker community saying about this equipment, what's been identified, and then we'll kind of take the first step into looking at some of those high priority items and build a much more in-depth threat model for that piece of equipment. And we'll feed that back into our system, and basically it'll help build up that database of stuff that ends up going into the web-based guidance. And then finally, we'll move into the guidance development phase. This will be kind of taking all the information we've kind of nebulously gathered up until this point and turning into something that's a little more step through, a little more guided process, and then using that information to help anyone that logs into the system kind of assess their level of cybersecurity. So the whole idea is that we'll use these models that we developed for the equipment that we've identified problems with, feed that back into a big database, and also look at those best practice guidance we identified for different industries or TMSs or whoever, feed that all in there, and then kind of create this walkthrough web page that'll let you log in, it'll let you upload lists of things that you have on your system, and supply yes or no or gray area kind of questions and answers to. And at the end, it'll generate a report and say, you're doing these things well, you're doing these things okay. Some of the things you should probably consider next are these ideas. And, basically from feedbacks, improvement from the models and things like that will be fed back into it. So as stuff kind of starts to move forward and people start to identify issues and, TMSs may take on doing penetration analysis on their equipment on their own, how they can submit their findings back into the process so that the whole community benefits. And we will host a couple of workshops, basically kind of proofing the equipment and the web-based guidance after we've kind of got it built up to a point where we think it's kind of ready for a soft demo. And at the same time, we're also going through industry and we're hosting things like this meeting here, as well as attending ITS America and a few others and trying to really gather community engagement. So the program process for this effort has been broken down into basically 5 paths. The literature and ongoing review is a look at, like I said, published documentation out there, so NIST Cybersecurity Framework, aerospace, cybersecurity guidance, those type of things. Collect that all into a document and kind of publish it as a reference. And then as we kind of identify things or things change as we go along, we'll keep putting that information back into that literature search. And it'll kind of be a good reference guide. So if folks are looking to try and say, hey, I'm looking for maybe some good examples of other network systems that have done a cybersecurity process and kind of done a really good job. So things like that are like airports and other areas that have a lot of bring your own devices, a lot of embedded small systems. You can also look at some of the other critical infrastructure areas like power and energy. We kind of try to pull all that information together into the literature review. Then there's the risk assessment. This is looking at trying to identify what called typical, but I know each TMS kind of has their own layout. Look at the different types of TMS architectures and equipment that they kind of all share, and then try to identify, like I said, which items we think are high priority, which would represent a good assessment, which would yield good results to kind of make that first step into improving the field network security. And then after that, we will acquire and subject those equipment to the adversarial assessment. And like I said, that'll actually be a physical assessment. The equipment will be taken apart, pen tested against. Right now I think we're looking at like a modified version of the OWASP standard. And then reports and information will be generated from that, and they'll be supplied back to the panel, and then we'll kind of go through it and talk about what a good adversarial assessment looks like, what things you should look for when you're asking for someone to do a pen test for you. What do you do with the findings when they do come back? Do you want to reproduce any of them in-house, that type of thing. And that information will also feed back into our model. And then task 4, this cyber attack mitigation and response guidance tool, is the development of the web tool and workshops that we talked about. And then T5 is the cybersecurity primer for connected and autonomous vehicles. That's an additional document that will basically cover the finer points of cybersecurity integration of CVAV technology into a TMS. For task 1, like I said, sorry, kind of gave a quick overview. But basically, we've reviewed the state-of-the-art across multiple disciplines. We've identified works that can be leveraged for TMS, and we've integrated existing cybersecurity maturity models and guidance. And it's going to be persistent throughout the rest of the project. So, we're encouraging members, people that are joining us on our panel, people we're talking to, as they identify things in industry, and cybersecurity is kind of an industry with a lot of churn in it, bring it to our attention. There's a lot of good stuff out there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of material that's kind of generic and maybe not applicable. But we're looking for anything that has good input to include in our effort. So the risk assessment of a TMS, like I said, this will be to go through and try to identify problems and then recommend mitigations for it. So once we identify the equipment, we'll try to recommend fixes. So some of the stuff is published, and you can go online and find CVEs published that talk about how to, address problems with different types of equipment or known vulnerabilities in certain versions of secure shell or something like that. How do you go about trying to improve those things once you identify? What do you do with that information once you've identified it? How do you track it and act on it? And then, like I said, we'll start modeling a TMS, which will be look at probably laying out a couple different types of networks and trying to figure out what they should look like and how the web tool can use them. So when the user goes through and says, we have a TMS that has this type of branching architecture, how does it make us more risky than someone that's got more of a flat topology subnetwork kind of arrangement, or vice versa? And then we'll integrate all that information back into our web tool, and we'll prioritize evaluation of the equipment. So the adversarial assessment, and from what I gather, most of the folks we've talked to is they're looking forward to this the most. This is something that's been kind of growing in industry for years and years and years, and it's basically the white hat hacking type of approach. So this is looking at different types of equipment and things like that, and then trying to see what the users can, or what the hacker would normally go for. So we're looking for things like FTP access, unauthenticated telnet, root privileges on the device through an embedded system, unencrypted communication for establishing setup or communicating or different types of things. If it's using a particular protocol, is it spoofable? Is it redirected? Can you sniff information from it that's useful to a hacker? How difficult is it for someone to reverse engineer the protocol? So if you're looking, for example, at a DMS sign and you watch the traffic across it, if you manage to get access to the network by plugging into the hub that's inside every roadside box, if you watch the traffic, do you see the message that comes across to the sign? And can you replay that? Can you do things like that? Can you manipulate that device? Can you manipulate other devices attached to that network? And basically, we'll update and refine our models. We'll produce some reports, and we'll walk the team through it and try to help everyone understand what went on and how it happened, so that the next time the TMS takes on a specific piece of equipment they want to improve, they'll have a good starting point. Task 4 is the web-based guidance, and like I said, we're kind of in a preliminary phase at this point. We've started building the tool out. We have some basic UI mock-ups, and we've been mostly working on accumulating a huge list of equipment and identifying issues with the equipment. We're also trying to identify any countermeasures we could use to help improve that equipment. At the same time, we're also looking for CV and AV standards and looking how they're going to be integrated into the test sites. And then we're also cultivating best practices. And finally, the attack mitigation and response. This will be something we're starting in the future, but basically this is, like I said, the guidance for V2V, V2I, and promoting adoption across the industry, as well as evaluating applicable and transportation cybersecurity framework input. So the current status is the literature search is published. We're seeking input from TMSs and those involved in connected AV technologies, and we're currently developing the web guidance framework. We're kind of halfway through building out the UI, and we've run into some interesting issues as far as protecting the information once it's published up to the NOCOE website, and how we make the users of that system feel comfortable that their particular information is protected and not persisting in the cloud, not becoming basically a honeypot for hackers that are interested in attacking TMS systems. Our current schedule is kind of here, and you can say we're currently into Q2 of 2018 basically. So we're just kind of starting into the adversarial assessment. The web-based guidance and the literature review are kind of ongoing, and the next, the interim face-to-face meeting is scheduled for about August timeframe. And that's pretty much a good overview of what we're doing now with the cybersecurity traffic management systems. Like I said, if you feel like you would like to talk to us, you had some input, you'd like to ask more questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Marissa. We're open to having a chat with anybody. We've got a large list of questions we'd like to ask. If you know somebody that's interested in TMS architecture and would like to discuss, or if you've had cybersecurity events and how you guys handled them, or how you'd like to handle them in the future. So thank you very much.
Dan, thank you so much. That was fantastic. So please use the question pod on the right of the screen over there to ask any questions, and we'll get to them at the end. So up next is Siva Narla from ITE. I'm going to be sharing on my screen, Siva, and I'll load it up here. And take it away. Siva.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I know we have a fairly small audience, so I'm sure we can start taking some questions at the end very quickly, and I hope to wrap up my presentation. But before I even start, I wanted to help you all understand a little bit of how you see these three projects. One common thread you will see in the three presentations and these three projects is that we're going to be talking a lot in the present continuous sense. So in essence, we are just about a third or so into the project cycle, depending on which project you are particularly looking at. There is a lot of overlap between the three projects, and I'll say that, I will explain that in a second. But as we are beginning to engage with the audience, with the users and practitioners, the reason why we are coming to you all at this stage is we want to help you understand there is a lot you can offer to these projects individually and enhance their value, because at the end of the day, it's not the technology, it's the usability of it. In terms of what you have seen Ray explain the overlap and the way in which these projects are working, I will also try to recap that in just 1 minute or less. Fundamentally, from what Ray has shown, the project that deals with the CV and also about the translation of the NIST framework to transportation, especially our industry, is what I think the value of that project is to the consumer, and or in this case the practitioner. We have been called the infrastructure owner operators. Whether we are in the public or the private sector, we are the infrastructure players, practitioners, professionals. In terms of what you heard the Swari presentation about a specific approach to figuring out where the TMSs, the traffic management systems, are vulnerable, what can be done, what should be done. And this third project I'm going to be talking about is establishing a framework or establishing a way in which we can, one, capture the user needs of the practitioners or the agencies as well as the practitioners in a way that we can assess the current state of security, cyber as well as physical, because both are very interconnected, and also assess how security is handled as a whole for the transportation industry from two different organizational channels within the industry. So next slide, please. What I mean by that is we have the transportation practitioner. We also have an IT or a cybersecurity division, you may call it, if you are a large organization, or in some cases you're just an IT engineer who is supporting the small to medium city or the small county, which may or may not have the same infrastructure. So what we are trying to do in this project uniquely is try to capture the needs. And in order to capture the needs, we need a broad representation of the audience. In order to have a broad representation of the audience, we had started to split the project into phase 1 and phase 2. Next slide, please. In the phase 1, as you will see, and this common need, I think, this slide is just to reinforce that all three projects have started with the same common driver and the need. Next slide, please. And you have heard about that. But fundamentally, what we are trying to do is now take a broad view of what is it that we are trying to do for the industry and what is the most critical function or functions in this case, as far as transportation industry is concerned, the practitioners that we all are. Safety, mobility, and trust. What we have been working on very diligently for the last many decades is ensuring that safety and mobility are firmly enforced. What we have now is a new challenge in trust. Do we trust the communication we are seeing? Do we trust the connections we have? Do we trust the information we have? How do we ensure that this trust is both not a blind trust and also fairly well authenticated in case there is a disruption? What do we do? How do we ensure that the damage to safety and mobility is minimized? How do we reduce the impacts, the negative impacts of breach of trust? Next slide, please. So in terms of what we are trying to protect, this is self-evident here. You can see the core. This is our view, the infrastructure view of the industry. However, the automakers and others would have a different view. They may start with the peripheral systems and the center-to-field network that we have. But in terms of who we are and what we are trying to service, we have the traffic management center or traffic management system, center-to-field network, and devices at the end. Next slide, please. In the phase one, we developed a partnership. Like I said before, we wanted to make sure we capture the broad industry. So in order to do that, we have a partnership, and I will reveal in the next slide who we have as partners. Next slide, please. This is the mission in the phase one. Owner, operator, industry, practitioners, state and local governments. Those are our members we wanted to ensure we have in our framework, in our project. In order to do that, we went to the following associations. Next slide, please. We have the partnership is represented by the AASHTO, ITS America, NEMA, ITE, and NACTO. In terms of this group, we jointly formed an MOU. We also ensured that there is support from US DOT through a contractual mechanism. Next slide, please. And we also ensured that this partnership has a broad participation not only from the stakeholders but also from the experts, from the people who can help guide and help us quickly adapt the NIST framework, the Homeland Security procedures, and also what we can consider the current law enforcement. I cannot state all the agencies mentioned, but we are trying to gain or get a leg up and not reinvent what we have already been established or what has been established by the broad industry. Next slide, please. So in terms of the partnership, you see that at the top, the 5 associations, and what you see is the dotted line to the right with the support from US DOT, the ITS Joint Program Office, and the FHWA. And what we have planned here are multiple work groups. And now you begin to see the overlap, I would believe, in that we are trying to establish a framework similar to, and we are trying to leverage what Ray has had with the adaptation of the NIST framework to the CV area in particular. So we intend to cooperate, collaborate, and learn from that project and quickly adapt. This is all happening in real time. It is not a sequential project. So in real time, we are going to work with Ray and adapt. We also are going to be gathering our needs from the infrastructure owner operators directly, and we would share that with the NIST framework. So in essence, what this leads to is a quick back and forth to ensure that the needs and the standards and the framework that exists are validated or validating each other. We also have a red team, and this is the work that we are going to have to collaborate and work with the work that you saw the SWRI team present. In essence, when the traffic management system was being focused on by the other project, we are going to adapt and take the lessons learned, and we are going to pass our needs along and broaden the test to include all of the systems, edge as well as the central systems, and also understand how some of that can be built into a web service. And I'm going to talk about what services this project, in particular this third project that you are hearing, can provide both in real times and proactively. So the third working group is about the vendors and the suppliers that are the participants of the industry, so that they can understand the current state as well as what is required of the device manufacturers or the system integrators and so on, to ensure that the industry can be better protected from the device level, from the vendor system level, and also right off the shelf. So off the shelf, we would ensure that there are system standards and protection given to our systems so that they can be configured to be right-sized. The biggest challenge we believe we are going to face is right-sizing cybersecurity to the audience, to the stakeholder. We do want to ensure that this doesn't become too onerous or it doesn't become too simple. It's not a number 2 key that you can simply grab and take over any other system. That isn't the intent. That isn't the simplistic nature of business. We have to constantly keep up. I'm going to talk about that next. Of course, the working group 5 is evident. It's the security and law enforcement. If you are noticing any screen issues and it hasn't refreshed back to this slide where you see the work groups, let us know through the chat box. We will help you out. But otherwise, moving on to the next slide, please. Now, in terms of what we are trying to do in this phase and where we are today, that's the reason why you saw at the title Needs Workshop. That is not the end goal, but that's where we are today. We just conducted a Needs Workshop where we had a detailed set of interview lists and questionnaires. We found what was necessary to conduct the what was necessary to understand. We understood that the collaboration and the cooperation that was needed at a cybersecurity level between the transportation department and the IT department supporting it, or the IT department within the transportation department if it is a large enough organization. So we learned quite a few lessons. I'm not going to repeat, or I cannot repeat or state exactly what was discovered, but what will be done is we will take the interviews and the information and create a construct or create a need assessment or a needs assessment statement that we are going to then build needs, at which point we can share with the broad audience or broad stakeholder community at large through the National Operations Center. And next slide, please. We also intend to do a dimensions of threat analysis, identify the gaps, the functional requirements, and here is where we intend to collaborate even more aggressively and actively with the other 2 projects to ensure that both the framework as well as the gaps are translated to the broad industry and the broad infrastructure footprint that we are trying to cover. Next slide, please. So we intend to use the National Operations Center and for all 3 projects combined to ensure that the center can present the collective assessment, the collective user resources, the collective results that are publish ready at that point as we go through. So there's a potential for outreach, discussion, forum, site characteristics, information sharing with other ISAC and ICS cert. If you're not familiar with these, trust me, you will be as you begin to browse and learn. Some of these are other industries' results where other industries have matured enough to understand cybersecurity, like the automotive sector and so on. ICS cert stands for Industrial Control Systems. This is a division within the Department of Homeland Security that looks at the industrial control systems, and they have alerts and other ways in which to notify the user we have to adapt a similar strategy, but not exactly the same site. We have to be domain relevant to our transportation industry. We also need outreach and training material that we intend to work on next. Next slide, please. So there is going to be an open forum and an open access on the Operations Center, and there is going to also be a closed access required monitor alert advisory system. The intent is to develop a monitor alert advisory system where an agency, an authenticated agency, an agency only, that could be a state, a city, a county, an MPO, or a transit entity, but in essence, a public sector owner-operator agency that would be able to both report confidentially a threat, perceived or real, and also be able to find other relevant information and specific information that either law enforcement or other agencies can offer. The intent here is to ensure that the agency's threat as well as the approach to solving it is kept away from any potential possible hacker or any potential possible entity that we are not entirely sure who or what they represent. So that is one of the intents, is to ensure that we can provide a reactive as well as a proactive element of alert and advisory system. Next slide, please. This would both have a specification, a prototype, and we have a basic website that we are going to have opened up to test how to do this. At the same time, the one concern we have is that we want to ensure that our approach is not transparent and easily accessible as well. It is intended to be a closed system by intent and design. We do want to have an open collaboration on information and resources, but on specific incidents, one, we do not want an agency to feel or to have its information broadcast, whether it is perceived or a real hack. Second, we do not want our method to resolving the same, if we are able to, or help resolving the same, be kept off the hands we may not know. Okay, so the intent is to have a process and a method and a website that will help, that is secure within the Operations Center overall outreach page. Next slide, please. As far as this project is concerned, we also have a self-assessment tool that this is optional intent that would help agencies assess for themselves. And if you have to take a parallel, think of this like a signal report card. You are being given a process and a templated way in which you can assess your agency's readiness. This is both an adaptation of the results and the NIST framework, as well as the results of this project's own red team testing, as well as the other project, the SWRI project that you heard at the 03127, the NCHRP project's testing efforts, and also advice and guidance provided by the law enforcement and the other vendor community, which is represented in the work group 3. So we intend to use this or provide this as a self-assessment tool. We do not audit. We are not here to audit an agency. Next slide, please. The general schedule, as you can expect, this is an estimation at this point. We intend to have user needs workshop, which was done last week, and draft ConOps, and walkthroughs, final ConOps, and draft gap analysis sometime in July. So the overall, what can you all expect to see? I think the answer to that is by the end of this year, you should have, as an agency, access, if you have been able to authenticate yourself and we are able to confirm all of the credentials, be able to use the website as we go through. This is intended to use a very dynamic agile methodology wherein we intend to release features as they are developed. We are not using a waterfall approach where we are waiting for all of the features to be discovered. We also expect to do quite a few updates in real time as we begin to understand the threats and the hacking methods and so on. This is a live process, and I think one thing we need to condition ourselves is that this is not like a project or a technique that is done. It is basically a catch-up. It's almost like you are trying to stay one step ahead if you're lucky, and you are trying to keep up with the bad guys in this case, what we call the black hat hackers, or any other threats that are showing up on the horizon. So we intend to ensure that as an industry, we are able to level the playing field and understand where we are today as a recap, and we intend to then be able to provide very specific tools which will have very specific utility. We do not intend to overpromise in this case. We are very conscious of needing to keep up, not necessarily, we will never be too far ahead of the bad guys in this case. We understand that. But as a project, we intend to make sure that we are fully and firmly committed to our stakeholders. We intend to provide information that our stakeholders can understand, appreciate, and adapt. With that being said, I do want to stop here. Thank you. Thank Ray for his overall presentation, as well as the NCHRP 03127 group for their help in this project that we have, these 5 associations. And last but not least, I also want to thank the USDOT for their support. Adam?
Eva, thank you so much. That was fantastic. So if anybody has questions for our 3 presenters, please go ahead and put them in the question box there to the right now, and we can get to them. I wanted to draw everybody's attention to the useful links that's down in the bottom right-hand side of your screen. It has the previous cybersecurity webinars. In addition, it also has the cybersecurity reporting tools that Siva just discussed, and then some more information on the National Operations Center of Excellence. I also want to thank my colleague, Nilu Parvanashiani, who's been organizing this series and done a fantastic job with the previous cybersecurity topics and this one as well. The National Operations Center of Excellence, as Siva said, will continue to work in this area, providing more resources and collaborating on the online reporting tool. I had a quick question for Dan. As you were going through, you mentioned in the lit review that you took a look at a few other industries and around their cybersecurity efforts. Where would you say transportation is in relation to those industries?
As far as transportation management systems, to my opinion, it's kind of at a state where there's no real identifiable baseline. So they're kind of getting going. Some groups have done considerably more than others. Some groups have, deployed things like intrusion detection systems on their networks to watch for anomalous traffic. There's other groups that have had done some really basic things that would be problematic if they were public knowledge. So in my opinion, it seems like everyone's kind of asking the right questions. Where should we be going? Where should we be getting started? What should we be looking at? And I think that's where a lot of this information is, these projects are starting to come from, is that group saying, we know there's problems. We know that we've been lucky to be this far, and what do we need to do to make sure that people don't tamper or take us hostage or those type of things. I know that, a quick Google search will reveal a variety of different things that have occurred. There's been some big notable hacks as far as people manipulating roadside signs and things, and a couple instances where basically the business operations side of a TMS has been taken hostage. And so a lot of them have been looking to kind of conventional IT type security solutions, and that's definitely a good first step. Lock down your network, lock down your business side. What we're looking at is more, what happens when people start figuring out that there's vulnerabilities within the field network. And, that system is a distributed network of low resource embedded systems. The ability to apply traditional IT infrastructure type solutions to that network is not as straightforward or nor available. So really long way of answering. I feel like starting to get going and they're heading in the right direction, and we just need to kind of figure out how do we apply guidance that's specific to the TMS type organizations, and that they can make use of it and not try to interpret high-level language about how to apply cybersecurity processes and things.
Great. Thank you. That's great. Ray, I had a question back to your presentation when you went over the different cybersecurity framework tiers. Do you have a sense of, as a reminder to everybody, we're looking at tier 1, which is partial, up to tier 4, which is practices where practices are fully established and continuously approved in terms of how they're viewing cybersecurity risk. Do you have a sense of what the major barriers or challenges are in organizations advancing in these areas?
I believe it's resources. It's resources and making sure that the organizational leadership is supportive of it. So depending on the size and what the organization does, getting from level 1 to level 4 can be very complicated. So it may cost quite a bit of money, or it may just be a matter of making sure that the organization's leadership are supportive of implementing the remedies that get you up to level 4.
Thank you, Ray. All right. Give folks one more second if there's any questions to go ahead and put them in the chat box. Again, this recording will be available on Monday along with the slides, and please feel free to reach out to our presenters for any additional questions that you have. Looks like maybe there's one more question coming in. We'll give it one more second. And remember, there's links down there at the bottom right for additional information about the National Operations Center of Excellence, and then several of the things that were mentioned today, including the NCHRP Project Lit Review, which is down there. I was browsing through that just real quickly, and that's definitely a great resource. Oh, a question from Nilu. So Nilu's question is, do we have a talent shortage for developing security professionals in the transportation industry? Kind of a workforce question. Any sense, Dan, Ray, or Siva?
I think, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Ray. I'm inside.
This is Dan Zajac. I was just going to say, I think it's kind of a drought in most industries right now. There's a lot of people trying to hire from those fields, and finding people that know what they're doing and know how to apply it to that applicable industry is kind of hard. So what you have is a lot of people that are kind of younger professionals that are coming out of school and stuff may not have the experience in the field, and so I think everyone's kind of struggling, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, we have done a deep dive on both the professionals as well as the general barriers within the current public sector. One thing that we have found, without revealing names, is that one, we cannot afford to even hire the ones that we believe we know we have a need for. So for an agency that has been able to work itself up to its chain of command, get the HR, get the management involved, and create a procurement and say, here is a job requisition, those requisitions and the pay structures that public sector have are not even compatible. What they have said in firsthand is that those guys are way too expensive for our public sector salary structure. So in essence, what I think is happening is at one level, most agencies are struggling to create those requisitions in order to be able to hire as a first step. And if you've been lucky enough to go to that second step, which is you've been able to get through your recruitment system and being able to advertise, they are quickly realizing that these professionals are very expensive. And that is the reason, the reason is what I think Dan and others have mentioned, which is that there is a general shortage in terms of real professionals who are involved, and in terms of experience, even 2 years is a lot of experience considering this profession. But those are the kind of people that are getting very expensive. There are institutions that are beginning to provide certificates and training and so on, but in general, anybody with some knowledge of the industry and some knowledge of the cybersecurity tools and techniques and having some formal or semi-formal training is proving to be quite expensive for our for our hiring procedures.
Thank you, Siva. Yeah, and it looks like it's brought up in the chat box around a need for a college-level awareness program at maybe a local ITE level, chapters to generate interest among young minds. I know at the National Operations Center of Excellence, we're pushing quite a bit this in our workforce efforts to start to attract electrical engineers, and one example, and then cybersecurity and data professionals and another example. So this is one of many, I think, young areas. Is ITE thinking about any sort of program that would increase awareness around cybersecurity specifically?
We are trying, and I think one of the reasons why this is a very good question, and I believe one of the reasons why it is a very good question is that we believe we have the support of our members, both from the public and the private sector, that this is a very important topic. On any other project, I would have had to canvas for membership to come voluntarily to working groups. In this one, I'm having to refuse people to join. I'm having to stop people from joining in some cases because there are way too many people and we have a limited ability to get ahead of the curve. So the answer to the question, the short answer is we ITE and also the other associations, as we are collaborating to do this effort, are beginning to realize our collective membership is demanding this. And what are we doing? We will work on trying to do similar webinars as we have more information that we are ready to share. Those are two conditions. And two, we're also trying to work with the U.S. Department of Transportation, its Professional Capacity Building Program, and request for support in the webinars that we have done in the past for ITS and expand it. So we have requested and we are working through the channels to make sure that such a need is getting evident and also passed on to the FSW and USDOT as well, to help every one of us understand that this is a need coming from the ground up and not necessarily a push we are trying to make from top down. So thank you. That's a really good question. And I think there was another comment here from one of our listeners, Dr. Raman Patel, a professor at NYU and a long-standing chair of multiple ITS efforts, that at NYU this is a very hot research topic, and I agree. Anybody wants to chime in?
Thank you, Siva. Like that's the extent of the questions that have come in. Again, we encourage you to reach out to presenters for more questions if they come up. And that information will be in the recording, and the slides will be available on Monday for you to send along to your colleagues and to review yourself. So again, I want to encourage you to take a look at the links at the bottom right of the page, and thank you for joining us today. And remember that there's a couple other cybersecurity webinars that are available on the National Operations Center of Excellence's website. And again, thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you all for the opportunity.